How's it going, summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. Since runes play a major role in every game, I think it's time to give an updated tier list for all of them. And not only that, we'll be talking about why they are good or bad. And let's just start straight away with Conqueror. Conqueror is in the OP tier. Conqueror is one of the most broken runes in the game. And Conqueror is without a doubt the most broken rune in the game because it provides you with such insane values in terms of stats and nothing can really beat it. I mean, just look at it. It grants you 10 to 30 AD or 15 to 45 AP. And not only that, it also grants you up to 7 or 10% adaptive damage once it's fully stacked. Nothing, and by nothing I mean really nothing, can compare to the value of this rune. The next rune we have to talk about is the Aftershock rune. This rune is mostly utilized by supports. No other champions really wants to run this rune because there are better alternatives. However, for the support role, who doesn't get so much gold, it's quite a nice rune to have. The reason is simple. They don't get as much gold, which means they don't get as many items, which means their tankiness is severely impacted. Unless you're named Alistair, then you get a lot of natural tankiness, but however, you will still take Aftershock. But generally ask yourself the question if you're the primary engage on the support role, and if so, you'll most likely take Aftershock. And Aftershock is just an overall nice rune, there's nothing bad to say about it. And next up comes another rune that is quite undervalued, and it's Fleet Footwork. Fleet Footwork is also known as the Baron Lane I'll Never Die rune. Whenever you're running this keystone, you'll make it 10 times harder for the enemy to kill you. The sustain you get is quite insane, and with the recent grass nerfs in mind, it's really a nice rune to never lose lane. However, you have to always think about that now your carry potential is severely limited because of the lack of Conqueror. And next up comes Aerie in the S tier as well. Aerie is a rune that helps you win lane more often. Its poke damage is quite nice to have depending on what champion you're playing, but primarily yet again support champions. Other than that, it doesn't only provide offensive stats, it also provides defensive stats in the form of a shield if you have any healing or shielding capabilities. So let's say you want to protect a very specific target in a fight, Aerie is going to help you out quite a lot. And now let's move over to the A tier with Grasp of the Undying. Grasp of the Undying has been recently nerfed a few times in terms of damage potential, and the main champions that use this rune got their base HP nerfed as well. So what does this rune do for you? This rune helps you to establish certain trading patterns. Every time it's up, you want to go for a very short trade and back off after again. With this, you want to deal some extra damage without exposing yourself to too much risk. Because if you're fighting, for example, a user with Conqueror, you get into trouble really soon because his rune doesn't have a cooldown, whereas yours has a cooldown. And right next to it comes the Electrocute rune. Electrocute is also known as a rune that wants to make you win the lane. Its bonus damage is surely helpful in burst situations and on Assassin really nice to have. However, that's mostly it. No other class, unless maybe a Rakan, uses Electrocute. Oh yeah, Gragas. Because the reason for that is rather simple as well. Its cooldown is just too high for what it grants you. But in lane, for example, you can play to a specific trading pattern. On your first trade, you want to put the enemy on 50% and then wait for another Electrocute cooldown to then kill him. It's the basic assassin playstyle. And last but not least, we have the Font of Life in the A tier. Font of Life as a rune is supposed to give us a lot of healing. But the issue with this rune is that you cannot really determine when your allies will be able to hit the enemy. And even if they don't hit the enemy, your spell or your rune will still go on cooldown. However, if we create some dream-like scenarios, this rune can really carry a fight. But for the conditions to be met, there needs to be a lot of things that need to happen. Which means it's not the most reliable rune, which puts it therefore in the A tier. And now we move over to the loser of this keystone bracket, and that is Phase Rush. In this game, there's not really much that needs Phase Rush. The game is fast enough, the champions are fast enough, and for what do we need even more speed? Then we take into consideration that we are playing a mobile game, which means that our ability to move around is severely impacted in terms of being so precise and fast with movement, and therefore it doesn't really feel like Phase Rush has a place in Wild Rift. At least not in the current version it is in. By the way, do you want a place in which you can find all the information needed to climb fast? Runes, builds, skill order, coaching, everything? No problem, just check out our membership. And let's go back to the video. And next up we have the Domination Tree. On the OP tier, we start with Vampirism. Vampirism grants adaptive stats on top of physical or magical vamp. This is an insanely strong scaling rune that provides you with a lot of value which you'd normally have to invest item slots for. Which means that if you buy Gluttonous Boots with a Bloodthirster later on thanks to the new itemization options for example AD carries, you get a lot of lifesteal for free. Another thing you get for free is on the Weakness rune, especially for supports or any kind of utility champions. The fact that you can increase your teammates' damage by like 5% by just slowing the enemy or CCing them in any kind of way is absolutely broken as a rune. It is severely undervalued because a lot of people think like, but it doesn't increase my damage. Well, it does increase your damage as well. So if your champion features a lot of CC or anything of utility, please consider the Weakness rune. And next up comes the most scary rune in this game, the Champion rune. Champion as a rune is something that grants us a lot of bonus damage but at a certain risk. It needed to be nerfed at some point because it was just too strong. But if you're playing in a competitive environment, or your champion is strong enough to not die ever because of the way your champion plays, take this rune. This rune is just too good. And after, in the S tier, we have Brutal. Brutal is the most default rune you can ask for if you're going into laning. Whenever you think about something, you can always take Brutal and not feel too bad about it. Obviously it won't be optimal in many situations, but it will quote-unquote never feel really terrible. Because after all, you'll still be gaining a lot of adaptive stats from it. And the next up is Triumph in the A tier. Triumph is a very situational rune for very specific champions. It doesn't really do too much because the other runes in this tier are simply way stronger. However, if you're a tank, one might make the argument that you can take this rune to survive longer in a fight. But that's something that is very case-to-case dependent. And last but not least, on the very last slot, we have Gathering Storm in the C tier. Gathering Storm is a rune that grants you more adaptive stats the longer the game goes on. However, we are just talking about raw damage. It doesn't provide us with any kind of vamp or early power, and it takes a lot of time for it to be better than any other of the alternatives, which is a huge risk. Because if we're taking the game's flow into consideration, average game time and all the other factors, taking this rune is a gamble. And a gamble that's not on our end. We don't like to take this gamble because there's no reason to, it's because the other alternatives we have are just straight up better. And now let's take a quick break for a question of the day. In your opinion, what is the strongest rune and why? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And now we move over to the most broken rune in the game next to Conqueror. We have the Resolve tree with Hunter Titan in the OP tier. Hunter Titan is absolutely insane, fully stacked that grants us 120 health and 20% tenacity. For reference, you can buy 150 health for 500 gold, and tenacity is only available on certain items. But here's a little disclaimer. Those stacking runes, Hunter Titan, Vampirism and so on, are runes that are very problematic in terms of positioning. The reason is, not all laners can equally benefit from their potential bonuses. For example, a Baron laner is less likely to stack Vampirism than for example a jungler, a mid laner or a dragon laner. It is just due to the nature of the game, but if the meta shifts a bit, there might be a difference very soon. And next up, we have Adaptive Carapace in the S tier. Whenever you're facing one certain type of damage like full AD or full AP compositions, this rune is absolutely broken. It's absolutely insane also in lane because of the bonuses it grants you. The bonus health and the resistances once you're low can really come in clutch. So if you're trying to snowball and win the game on your own, this rune is your go-to. At least if you want to or need to win lane through it. And next up comes Second Wind also in the S tier. With Second Wind we can build an Exodia composition of for example Ruby Crystal, Fleet Footwork and Second Wind. With those healing capabilities, nothing will kill us in lane. Nothing. We are just way too tanky and regen way too much. And next up comes Conditioning in the A tier. Conditioning has one specific problem. It takes too long to be valuable in this game. It doesn't match the game's flow and is not strong enough to be taken. Especially if you consider the other alternatives you have. And next up also in the A tier is Loyalty. Loyalty is a rune for supports that just want to increase their allies' bonus stats. For example, if you're playing an Enchanter and you're out of harm's way anyway, might as well take Loyalty to buff your ally. But now we move on to the most problematic rune in this tier in terms of balancing and being overall good or bad. Bone Plating is a very situational but mostly bad rune. There are a few reasons for that. Number one, its cooldown is 45 seconds, which is absurdly long if you take the game space into consideration. That is nuts. And the second thing is that it's way too easy to proc before you engage in combat, unless you're playing into a combo-centric champion that cannot proc it from range. Also worth of noting is that you cannot check runes before the game starts as an enemy, which means on level 1 you might have the advantage because the enemy doesn't know you have it, which might be very helpful against a champion such as Rune, for example. But never take this rune unless you're against a very combo-centric champion that is not able to proc it from range. It's just very bad. And next up, we go to the Inspiration Tree. And we start with the UP tier with the Sweet Tooth. Sweet Tooth is, if anything, the most default rune you can take in terms of laning. It will never really feel bad and provides you with some extra gold coins and healing. So if you take this Exodia composition into consideration again, like Fleet Footwork, Ruby Crystal, Second Wind, and Sweet Tooth, how can you die unless you literally want to die? It's not possible. And next up in the S tier we have a rune that more laners are starting to pick up as they realize they don't always need the Sweet Tooth. For example, some matchups don't really need Sweet Tooth because they're not engaging into any combat activity. Therefore having Sweet Tooth would only grant them like 60 gold, which is not really worth it if you only take it for that. However, Mana Flow provides you with mana which you need to buy. And depending on what items you go, like Mana Mune or Archangels, it also buffs your damage and sustain. And the next rune in the S tier is the Mastermind rune as a default rune for the jungle. As a jungler we are running around the map a lot and we are taking objective at the same time. If you see a tower is taken or an objective is taken, the jungler is most likely to be around. And Mastermind grants us extra gold and extra damage to those targets, which means it's a nice added benefit. And the next thing on the S tier we have Hunter Genius. Do you remember the reasoning I presented for Mana Flow Band? It is basically the same for this rune. And it's really nice to have if your build is otherwise CDR staffed, which means that you don't have a lot of ability haste. And next up in the A tier we have Pack Hunter. Pack Hunter is one of the most default runes you can take on support because the alternatives are, as you see, not that many. However, Pack Hunter grants you a bonus and your allies a bonus, so for example the Enchanter role it's quite nice to have if you don't need to run Mana Flow Band. And last but not least we have Pathfinder. Pathfinder can be broken, but it can also be unbelievably useless. The benefit of Pathfinder is the added movement speed we gain when running through jungle, river or brushes. However, it's very conditional and doesn't grant us immediate things at the same time. Which doesn't mean it's bad in any way, it's just conditional and we can make things work with it if we play more gank-centric. But if you're more a friend of consistency and knowing your strengths and weaknesses, Mastermind is surely going to pay off more because of the added gold. And that's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching and see you tomorrow for another Wild Rift video. See ya.